The one thing I might have done differently is look for a house with fewer of these incidental costs, right? So if I wasn't so close to the water, I wouldn't have to do the flood insurance. If I wasn't outside the city limits, I wouldn't have to pay for the extra fire and protection, stuff like that. I wish I would have known about those things in order to judge where to buy and which house to buy.
Welcome to the Personal Finance for PhDs podcast, a higher education in personal finance. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Roberts. This is Season 6, Episode 7, and today my guest is Dr. Kevin Jennings, a professor of Criminal Justice and Criminology at Georgia Southern University in Savannah, Georgia. Kevin and his wife bought a home in Savannah shortly after he started his position, and the house has proven to be a money pit. Kevin catalogues all that has gone wrong with the house, what he wishes he would have known as a first-time homebuyer, and the lessons he's learned the hard way. You won't want to miss Kevin's insight into how his choice to purchase this home has affected his mindset toward his academic career. Without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Kevin Jennings. I have joining me on the podcast today, Dr. Kevin Jennings, and he is going to talk to us about, a bit of a money pit that he is currently invested in. So we're going to hear tons more about that. Kevin, will you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. Kevin Jennings. I'm from Austin, Texas, and I went to Texas State University, go Bobcats, meow, and got a PhD in criminal justice in 2014. I was then hired at Armstrong State University in Savannah, Georgia, and I moved there immediately after graduating for a tenure track job, which I realize how lucky I am to land a tenure track job just out of getting my PhD. And I mostly focus on cybercrime and digital forensics. So I do a lot of work with law enforcement, but also work with computer science people and tech people to kind of find evidence on digital storage devices.
What an exciting topic.
Yeah, it's really fun.
We'll hear more about that at the end of the episode.
I hope so.
Where people can learn more. So you moved to Savannah for this position. You said that was 4 years ago. Is that right?
5 years ago.
5 years ago. Okay. And you decided when you moved there shortly after that you were going to buy a home. Can you tell us more about how you did that, shortly out of graduate school, and why?
So we moved here in 2014 and rented a house. Unfortunately, in 2015, my grandfather passed away, and he was the last of my 4 grandparents. And he left my parents and his 3 siblings a fairly decent amount of money. And my parents decided to share some of that with me and my sister. So we got this decent sized chunk of money, and it wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough for a down payment on a house. And my wife and I, having so recently started our actual career jobs, feeling like we were more adulty than we really were, decided to use that as a down payment on a house. So we shopped around the city of Savannah. We were leaning towards finding either a fixer-upper that we could, get for cheap and put money into, or kind of a duplex or house that had something we could rent out. Our real estate agent showed us this house that in the neighborhood we were currently living in, which is great, it's, less than 10 minutes from campus, really nice houses. And it was neither of those things, but we both fell in love with it. It's kind of a 2.5 story, 4-bedroom, 2-bath, huge backyard, and where the backyard ends, there's a tidal creek right behind it. It's just swamp and woods, and it was just beautiful. And we just kind of both fell in love with it. So even though it wasn't what we were looking for, we decided that this was the house we really wanted.
And with that down payment money, you were able to do the purchase? Yeah.
We were able to afford the down payment, which was, I believe, 10% of the total purchase cost, which it was listed at $160,000, and we were super good negotiators and talking down to 159. So we put, again, I want to say it was 10% down. And we got this house and we were so excited. But we sat through kind of the lecture from the bank on, here's your mortgage payment and here's what that's going to consist of. And we were really shocked at how little of our actual mortgage payment goes into the principal amount of the loan. I mean, it was so I have my latest house bill here, and my monthly payment is $1,142. Of that $1,142, $233 goes to the principal, which, I mean, that's what, 20% maybe? So we were kind of shocked by that, and we were looking at the other kind of things that had to go and pay for. And there was the stuff we were expecting. Obviously, interest is going to be a big deal. The interest on ours is $460 a month. So we knew that was going to be a big deal. Taxes, of course, we expected. Coming from Texas, the taxes were actually slightly lower than we thought they were going to be, because Georgia has an income tax rather than relying on property taxes the way Texas does. But then the other things that got added in there are the stuff that really kind of shocked us. First off, because we had that beautiful tidal creek in our backyard, we were required to get flood insurance, which most homeowners insurance doesn't cover floods. And since we're, Savannah is a low-lying coastal city, plus we're right up against that tidal creek, we were required by law to get flood insurance. The other thing we didn't expect was private mortgage insurance. It's like $200 a month for this private mortgage insurance, essentially because we're first-time homeowners. And that will go away when we've paid the mortgage down to 80% of the level of the value of the house. But since we only put 10% down, getting from 90% of the value to 80% of the value is going to take years. And we've been paying for 4 years, and we're still, I don't want to say nowhere close, but not nearly as close as we'd like to be to that 80% level that'll allow us to take away that private mortgage insurance. So that's $200 a month we're paying for essentially not having enough money. So just all those things combined to create a mortgage payment that we really kind of weren't expecting. Homeowners insurance, flood insurance, private mortgage insurance, all that stuff really adds so much to the monthly fee, which really hurts in the long run.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and make a couple comments for the listener in case they're not that familiar with the structure of mortgages. Just, you mentioned a couple, shocking figures, like the amount of your monthly payment that actually goes towards principal is $200 some, whereas the amount that goes towards interest is $400 some. And people may not realize this, but mortgages are on an amortization schedule where you pay, the great majority of your payment in the first year goes towards interest, very little goes towards principal, and that shifts over the course of the loan. So in year 30, if it's a 30-year mortgage, you're paying vast majority towards principal and very little towards interest, and ultimately pay off the loan. So it's really like when you start over with new mortgages, maybe every 5 years or something, if you move, that amortization schedule, you're kind of always playing around in the paying mostly interest, very little in principal part of the amortization schedule. And that's why it is so difficult, like in your case, to get from 10% equity up to 20% so you can remove that private mortgage insurance, because mostly what you're paying, as you said, is towards interest, plus all these other things you had to add on to the mortgage. So it's really kind of, people talk about the differences between the advantages of renting versus buying. But the thing is that in your case and many others, when you have so much of your monthly mortgage payment that goes towards anything other than the principal, that's almost like paying rent. It's just money that's out the door every single month. That's not really building, your own net worth, your own equity in the house. It's just stuff that has to go out the door to keep you in that house. And so I wanted to know, when you were sitting through this explanation from your bank, which actually it's kind of cool that they gave you the explanation, honestly, like they were doing a little bit there to help educate you. Was that like, how far along in the process were you, and were you ready to like run out the door, or was that no longer an option?
It was no longer an option. But I was so ecstatic over finally owning a home that I just it didn't quite hit me what exactly it meant until, I had made a couple of payments. The other thing was, it wasn't until I think a year after we bought the house, my wife decided to go back to school. So she helped put me through grad school. And then a year later, a year after I graduated and moved here and got this job, and she decided to go back to school to become a nurse. Because what she did before, there's really no job market for here in this part of the country. So while she was still kind of working a semi-decent job before she went back to school, we were paying extra towards the principal every month, which I had been told was a very, very good idea, because anything extra you can put in, especially at the beginning of a mortgage, really knocks down, the long-term cost of the mortgage. So we were able to put an extra, I can't remember exactly how much, extra $50 or $60 a month towards the mortgage for the first year, maybe 2 years, that we were in the house. With her back in school, that was, we really had to tighten our belts. We're not able to do that. But now she's graduated, just started her new job yesterday, in fact. And I'm really excited to be able to kind of go back to doing that, put even just a little bit extra towards that mortgage. I think will help a lot.
Yeah, like you said, you get a lot of bang for your buck when you start paying down that mortgage at the beginning a little bit faster, at least until the point where you can get rid of PMI. I mean, that's like a really big, goal when you have a mortgage, is to not, to not be paying insurance on the behalf of the bank to insure against you, to not have to pay that, makes a huge difference. So at least you get to that point. That would be amazing. So, I mentioned earlier that your house has kind of turned into a little bit of a money pit, right? So it's not only, the structure of the mortgage payment that you were learning as you got into the house, that, hey, not that much of this money is actually going towards principal. But in fact, you've incurred a lot of other expenses that you did not really realize or factor in when you first got into the house. So can you outline what those are, please?
Absolutely. So we were buying this house and we realized we wanted to do a bunch of stuff to it. So right off the bat, as soon as we bought it, we knew we wanted to take out all the carpet, because we hate carpet. And we wanted to replace a lot of the lighting fixtures, because the house was built in kind of the mid-90s, and it had those kind of classic, like, little glass globe things that were super cheap and in every house back then. So we knew we wanted to replace those. We knew we wanted to paint a bunch of stuff. And that was when my wife and I kind of both realized that we don't have those skills. We were both very nerdy in high school and college, and we never got those kind of, woodworking and electrician, and, I can barely use a screwdriver. So those skills are something that I really wish I would have had before I decided to buy a house. But so we rip up the carpet, and two big problems presented themselves. One, there were places where the floor was uneven, and the carpet kind of hid that. But two, the stairs that we had hoped to just kind of refinish were just kind of, ugly 2x4s that they had nailed down. So for the floors, we hired someone to come in and put in some vinyl flooring, which I was shocked at how much vinyl flooring costs. But it's still cheaper than hardwood. The stairs, we replaced ourselves, and the flooring was not installed properly. We just kind of found somebody, on Craigslist or something, and brought them in. And that was a really bad idea. If you're going to hire someone to come in and work on your house, don't go for the kind of cheap fly-by-night operation. Definitely try to find someone you trust, or a company that has, you can go on Yelp and find their reviews, stuff like that. Then there were little expenses, like we had to replace the mailbox. paint, because we wanted to paint a bunch of stuff. But yeah, that was when we first moved into the house, those were kind of the big expenses that we'd kind of sort of planned for. We had saved some money to the side that we weren't putting into the down payment just for those improvements. But we went, I don't want to say wildly over budget, but fairly over budget on that process.
So you're saying there were certain things that when you bought the house, you knew, okay, you hate carpets, you're going to tear all those out. There were certain things that were obvious upon purchase you knew you were going to take care of, and you had prepared to some degree to do that with savings.
Right.
What's next? Were there other things that has come up in the years since then?
So we are in a coastal city, and when we moved here, we were told, don't worry about hurricanes. Hurricanes never hit Savannah because we're kind of tucked into the coast. And then, of course, since we've moved into the house, we've had 2 hurricanes. So our fence, when we first moved in, and for a long time we had dogs. We are now dogless, unfortunately, rest in peace. But one of the reasons we like this house is because it had a fence and a big area for the dogs to play in. But one of the hurricanes that came through kind of finished it off and knocked it down, or at least a large section of it down. So we got our entire fence replaced, which was, thousands of dollars we weren't planning on spending. And even though we had essentially hurricane insurance, the deductible on that is like almost $5,000, I want to say. So it really wasn't financially viable to use the insurance to fix that fence issue. The second problem is that the upper half of the second floor was an add-on. When they originally built the house, it was just the first floor and the main part of the second floor. The upper part was all attic space. The second owners of the house finished out that attic space and turned it into a 4th bedroom. What we didn't know when we bought the house, and what the home inspection didn't show, is that when they finished out that area, they had to move the indoor air conditioning unit. When they did that, instead of redoing the drain line the way they should have, they just ran a new line from where it used to be to where it is now. So essentially the drain line for the air conditioner goes from one part of the house across the house to where the air conditioner used to be, down under the flooring of the attic, then back across the house to where the air conditioner is now to actually drain out of the house. We had no idea that had been done that way. So we had all these problems with the air conditioner. Finally, we call in a good repair company, and they come in and take a look at it, and they're like, yeah, the drain line's all bad. But also, this air conditioner system is designed and built for a house of the old size. With the addition, you've added so many square feet that you really should move up. And it's getting towards the end of its, like 20-year life or whatever it was anyway. So if we're going to do all this work, it'd be a lot better in the long run to just replace the entire system. So we said, okay. So we got a new indoor unit, a new outdoor unit, ended up needing to rerun all of the ducts because when they had done the addition, they had messed up the duct work. New thermostats, whole 9 yards. I think we spent $13,000 on essentially a $15,000 system. Then it started having problems and wouldn't work. And we spent the next year replacing parts and getting service. And finally, after a year, they just replaced a huge chunk of the outdoor unit, all these things. But it took them a year in the South Georgia heat with no air conditioning before they finally figured out kind of what was wrong and how it was messing up. But essentially we ended up with as part of the replacements, they gave us improvements. So essentially we got a $17,000 air conditioning system for $13,000. But that's still $13,000 we hadn't budgeted for, we hadn't planned on. So I think we got a 6-year loan, interest-free, luckily. And that's $230, $240 a month that we weren't planning on, which right when my wife was in the middle of nursing school was a very difficult financial burden to kind of take on unexpectedly.
Yeah, I was just going to ask how you actually did pay for that, because that is I'm thinking about your mortgage payment, and that whole system costs about what a year of housing costs for you. That's, a huge expense. So
Yeah.
glad to hear that you got some decent financing.
Yeah.
It's not going to cost you any extra in interest, but what a saga. And especially to live for a year without proper air conditioning, as you were describing. Are those the big things that you've, had to lay out for the house?
Those are kind of the big things.
Emily here for a brief interlude. I bet you and your peers are hungry for financial information right now, especially if it's tailored for your unique PhD experience. I offer seminars, webinars, and workshops on personal finance for early career PhDs that can be billed as professional development or personal wellness programming. My events cover a wide range of personal finance topics, or take a deep dive into the financial topics that matter most to PhDs, like taxes, investing, career transitions, and frugality. If you're interested in having me speak to your group or recommending me to a potential host, you can find more information and ways to contact me at pfforphds.com/speaking. We can absolutely find a way to get this great content to you and your peers, even while social distancing. Now back to our interview. There's a rule of thumb, and you might laugh at this, but maybe you've heard it before. There's a rule of thumb that you should expect to spend on average on your home 1% of the value of the house per year. So like average 1% of the value of the house per year on home, maintenance and repairs and so forth. Sounds like you probably have blown that out of the water every year you've lived there, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So the downside is we now have our garage doors. We have 2 garage doors that need to be replaced because it's Savannah, Georgia. Everything is wet here constantly. It's just moisture. It's ridiculous. So our garage doors are rotting out and we need to replace those. Our deck, for similar reasons, it's not bad, but we're anticipating that we're going to need to replace it in the next couple of years. So there's more thousands of dollars of stuff that we're kind of dreading and preparing for. The other things that have really shocked me are things like we're technically outside of the city limits, right? So we have to pay for fire and EMS services directly. Instead of it being paid for through our city or county taxes, we have to pay, I want to say it's just under $300 a year to the fire and EMS service to come out. We have to pay for termite inspection yearly, or termite service yearly, which is hundreds of dollars a year. So all these things have really combined. We didn't think about it, going from an apartment to a house, you expect, okay, rent, mortgage, there's going to be taxes and interest and principal. But then it seems like there are all these other fees and taxes and payments for things that you would never expect, having spent your entire life, or at least entire adult life, in apartments and renting places. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think a couple of the lessons that I'm hearing from this that maybe the listener can apply, 2 things. One is do the work right the first time.
Yes,
Invest in quality from the beginning, and hopefully you won't have,
definitely.
ongoing problems, or, the replacement cost or whatever won't come up so soon. Part of that was decisions you've made. Part of that was the previous homeowner's decisions, but pay for it to be done right the first time. And the second one is maybe, I don't know, like, I think that it sounds like you did what any reasonable person would do in terms of buying the home, in that you lived in that neighborhood for a year prior to buying. And you
Hmm.
think, that, you know where everything is, you know where the schools, like whatever you're considering in your home buying purchase, just by
Right.
living nearby, you've learned a lot of those things. But it sounds like you didn't investigate, and why would you have? The fact that these services were being billed directly instead of, through the tax system, or like, all these other like line items, or, maybe if you'd understood more about flood insurance, like you would have been, you would have told your real estate agent, no, I'm not interested in anything next to, a creek or whatever. I mean, those are not things you're going to naturally pick up just by living somewhere.
Right.
Like, you're learning this the very hard way.
Yes.
And so I'm really, pleased to be able to share your story with the listeners, to just say, like, there's probably going to be more expenses than you think there will be. So just plan for the unexpected, right? And prepare for that. But maybe do a little bit more due diligence. I don't know,
Yeah.
to try to figure out what the peculiarities are of this, city that you're choosing to buy in.
Right.
Like you're saying, well, people told you hurricanes never hit Savannah. Turns out, at least for the recent years, that hasn't been the case. But I don't know. I think you did what any reasonable person would do. So I'm not criticizing you, but I'm just,
Yeah.
really glad to hear this for anyone else who's coming up on a home buying purchase, to do a little bit more, to figure out what all these little nuanced expenses are going to be.
Absolutely. The
I'd
other
like
thing
to, yeah.
I want to point out is home inspections. Do not skimp on the home inspection. We had a fairly decent one, but they missed a lot of these things where if they'd have been just a little bit more paying attention, a little bit more thorough, we would have known about these things in the contract negotiation process, not a year or 2 years or 3 years later. So do not skimp out on the home inspection.
Yeah, definitely. I know so I live in Seattle. So in the market here, at least in recent years, it's been a seller's market, right? So,
Oh yeah.
And a lot of people, as part of the bid that they enter, they waive inspections. Like, they don't, it's just something that no one wants to hold up the process. But even if you have to go that route based on what's standard in the market, still do the inspection. even
Absolutely.
if you don't have it as part of, the contingency or whatever, still do it, so all these things up front, like you were saying. So I'm curious about how your position as a faculty member, as an academic, has played into these homeownership decisions, or your ability to handle these things, I guess. So it sounds like, you got this tenure track position, despite a little bit of upheaval with your university. You've maintained that, and you bought a home where you got your tenure track position, probably what anyone would try to do, if
Right.
possible, soon after. So yeah, how does being an academic affect this whole home ownership situation?
When I was in grad school, I kind of bought into the belief that if you can find a really nice, good tenure track job, you can stay at that university for a long time, decades, if not your entire career. At the university I went to, and the department I was in, there were a lot of professors that had been there for 20, 30 years. So I was kind of expecting that kind of experience. So when I moved here and was ready to buy the house, I was very much in this mindset of, my family will be at this university, working here for the long, long, long time. So we chose, in the university system of Georgia, you have an option between a pension system or a 401k. And if you're going to be there longer than 10 years, the pension system is really the better option. So that's what I chose, because I thought, oh, I'll be here at least 10 years. No big deal. I'll buy a house. I'll be here at least the 5 or 6 years that it takes to really get enough equity in a home to make a profit when moving. But I've come to kind of find out and realize that job hopping and transferring positions is almost or just as important in academia as it is in private industry. Growing up in Austin, there were a lot of tech people, and tech people were all talking about, oh, you got to move jobs every 5 years or every however many years. And I thought academia was kind of exempt from that. And it comes to find out, it really isn't. You know, it's depressing when you've been working at the same university for 4 or 5 years, and they make new hires straight out of grad school, hired at well more than you're making. So I wish I was able to move, or at least have the possibility of moving, you know. I wouldn't necessarily want to leave. I love my job. I like living here. I like the university I'm at, but being so tied financially through both the house and the pension to this one job in this one place is something that, even if I am going to stay here for the next 10 or 20 years, it's still distressing. And it makes me feel like I don't have options. It makes me feel like I'm stuck. Even if I want to be here, that's still kind of a bad feeling, you know?
Yeah, I definitely understand that. You know, sometimes people refer to the benefits or something that a job gives you as golden handcuffs. So it's like you feel tied to your job because you don't want to lose the great compensation or the benefits, whatever. The pension is a little bit like that for you, but the house is on the other side of that. That's not so much golden handcuffs as it is kind of an anchor. Until you get this equity up to a certain point, it's going to be very I mean, it's not impossible, but it's,
obviously,
you know, you may take a loss, you may have to bring money to the table, something, if you were to try to move without having a lot of years under your belt paying this mortgage and, you know, getting the equity up there. So I definitely understand what you're saying. And I think it's a really great insight for other people who are looking to enter the job market, that we think a lot of times as getting that tenure track position as like, I've made it. Yeah, this is it. Like, that's all I needed to do. And I'm going to be set for the rest of my career because I landed that one position. And what you're saying is, hey, that's good for the first few years, but don't think that you're never going to apply for another job. Like, don't that to advance in the way you want to, that you don't necessarily, you know, might not have to move around, as you said, like what happens in the private sector. So I'm really glad for that insight as well. And just, I don't know, would you have done anything differently? I mean, knowing this now that you know this about your job and your feelings about it, would you still have purchased the house? Because it still kind of seems like the thing to do, right?
Yeah, it does. And that's, you know, it depends on what the alternative is. If the alternative was, you know, renting, I don't think I would have. The one thing I might have done differently is look for a house with fewer of these incidental costs, right? So if I wasn't so close to the water, I wouldn't have to do the flood insurance. If I wasn't outside the city limits, I wouldn't have to pay for the extra fire and protection, stuff like that. I wish I would have known about those things in order to judge where to buy and which house to buy, right? Does that make sense? So it's not that I regret buying a house, it's that I regret not understanding exactly what the costs of buying this particular house are.
Right. Yeah, thanks for your insight into that. So 2 questions as we wrap up here. The first is, what is your best piece of advice for another early career PhD? Could be related to, you know, the conversation we've been having, could be something else. What is that?
Start putting money away as fast as you can. Start saving. It can be a 401k. It can be putting extra money towards just a stock trading account. Also, so speaking of stock trading accounts, I found the Fidelity, I think it's a bank, but it has a stock trading app thing. And they have a credit card where you get 2% cash back from every purchase that goes straight into the stock trading account. So I put all my purchases on that and pay it off in full every month. So I never pay a dime in interest, but I still get 2% into this long-term savings account. And then once I build up enough money from that, I can purchase, you know, a stock or a exchange traded fund or something like that. And then, you know, I never touch that. That's all just socked away money. That's essentially free money. As long as you're paying off that card every month, that's essentially free money. So definitely do something like that. It can be a travel card that gives you miles on an airline, but make sure it's paid off in full every month.
And second question, last one here, is where can people find you?
So I'm on Twitter with the username @cybercrimedoc, and I'm on YouTube with the channel name Arresting Developments. And I actually do have a group I just started not too long ago called Americans for Election Reform. It's a big political focused on elections and election security and making sure all Americans vote and all votes count. And that is on Facebook and Twitter.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Kevin, and for telling us this very easy to learn from story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Listeners, thank you for joining me for this episode. pfforphds.com/podcast is the hub for the Personal Finance for PhDs podcast. There you can find links to all the episode show notes and a form to volunteer to be interviewed. I'd love for you to check it out and get more involved. If you've been enjoying the podcast, please consider joining my mailing list for my behind-the-scenes commentary about each episode. Register at pfforphds.com/subscribe. See you in the next episode, and remember, you don't have to have a PhD to succeed with personal finance, but it helps. The music is Stages of Awakening by Poddington Bear from the Free Music Archive and is shared under CC by NC. Podcast editing and show notes creation by Miriam Ock.